Now beat it. You too. I just want to make sure.
Joe, there don't have to be no trouble.
No, there don't have to be no trouble. There's got to be. Certain wise guys have to be taught a lesson. Certain wise guys have to be... Where do you want it, here or outside? Outside'll do me fine. There's an alley through the kitchen door.
Sam.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for our show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Dr. Petr Fedichev, who is a founder of Gero, a longevity biotech company that was founded by a group of research scientists and entrepreneurs with the goal of creating a therapy that will actually extend human lifespan. You're an accomplished researcher with over 40 scientific publications in peer-reviewed journal as well as patents. I'm curious, what are the areas of research that's really excited you the most?
Well, I got graduated in physics and have never regretted about that ever since. So I did theoretical physics in Moscow, where I was born, and then I moved to Amsterdam, and then to the University of Innsbruck, and then went essentially to the dark side to set up a company. We started doing completely different things. So, I'm attracted to challenging problems. I've been doing really crazy stuff in physics. And, I got fascinated with biology, and I thought that some of the tricks which we have learned in physics can actually work very well in good biology. And here I am here.
All right. So the project that you guys are working on has originally evolved from Quantum Pharmaceuticals, which is a drug discovery company that focuses on molecular modeling. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Sure. Well, when we started looking for some applications of good old style physics to biology, the first idea which came up to our minds is the idea that you can use molecular modeling. I mean, compare that with machine learning. So machine learning is when you have 10,000 examples and you try to build a model. So in physics, by modeling, you mean that you understand the process and you explain the process. So that's why you can build an atomic bomb without actually seeing any atomic bomb in your training data set. So we started looking for ways to predict how molecules like drug-like molecules can bind to protein targets to create new drugs. And that's what quantum pharmaceutical has been doing for a while. And then as we progressed and as we graduated in a few of our projects, we designed very cool molecules. I mean, for the first time, we, for example, hit the matrix protein of HIV. That was a drug of a totally new kind, and other stuff. We also realized that most of the time in biology, it's not the problem how to find a new drug. The problem most of the time is how to find the target for the drug. And that's how we flipped and we started using physics in order to actually find new drugs against complex diseases, such as obviously aging.
All right, so let's talk about what exactly are you guys doing at Gero?
Well, at Gero, we are looking at, Gero is the product of convergence of multiple technologies. So most of the time in biology, you study animals like mice, for example. You learn how mice age or develop diseases, and then you try to cure such a disease in mice, and then you go back to humans. Or at least lots of drugs, excluding folks medicine, were developed in such a way. Folks medicine has been testing drugs in humans for thousands of years. So the problem with this approach is that, for example, mice live only for 2 years and something, and it's very hard to learn how not to age from an animal which is dead within 2 years, whereas you can live, 60 years without major diseases. So that's why we built our company with the idea that with the emergence of large databases, with electronic medical records and lots of genetics and AI, of course, to comprehend all this information, we can actually study how diseases and aging progresses in humans from human data. Do essentially in-human discovery of biological processes and regulators, for example, of aging of other diseases, in such a way that we can learn how not to age from human data, suggest interventions, and then test them in animals and hopefully get back to humans with a dramatic effect.
All right. So your team presented your approach at the Frontiers Genetics back in 2018. I wonder if you could elaborate a little bit more in terms of how you're using this neural nets with the physical models to study the dynamic processes and to develop algorithms for biomarker and drug discovery.
Yeah, that paper you are referring to was actually a white paper. So we just put it into a peer-reviewed journal to make it a little bit more credible. And since then, we have done quite a few things. So once again, the promise was that let's look at human data and see what happens with real-life humans in the real world, not in the laboratory, not in the hospital. The premise is obviously is that when you go to a hospital, you don't need any fancy AI biomarkers. When you go to a hospital and you get sick, you go to a doctor and doctors know everything about you, lots of stuff. The problem is that people do not come to hospitals out of the blue. I mean, people are born, developed, and then start aging, and then they get a disease, get chronic diseases. And the problem is that medical records do not know much about what happens before you get the first major disease. So we used data analysis from different kinds of measurements on humans, healthy humans from biobanks, in order to understand what happens between, for example, you at 20 years old and you at maybe 60 years old and even more in developed countries before you contract a major disease. So what makes you vulnerable to those major diseases? What makes the chances of those diseases double every 8 years? What are those processes which are not yet in the domain of medicine? Because medicine doesn't care if you are not sick. If you're 70 and you don't have a disease, go home. But obviously, a 70-year-old person has multiple capacities diminished. So we started looking at these data sets from the essentially biomarkers from very large cohorts, 500,000 people in UK Biobank alone, for example. We also scouted for every kind of data set which we could find on actual humans along the individual aging trajectory. So we try to observe how humans age from one point to the other every year over tens of years. So what we have at this time is the models, which are, I would say, almost as good as those models which predict weather. So in weather prediction, you have lots of sensors. You put the sensor data into a computer and you know what is the weather tomorrow. So this is physics, right? So that's what people do in meteorology. So we're trying to bring the same standard of modeling in biology. You measure lots of variables on a human being, you put the data into computer, and you understand what happens to this person in 10 years. And if you have such a model, you can tweak it a little bit and see what you should change in that human in order to make it live older. And now we have much better publications. We have Nature Communications paper, which is a high-tier journal, which is coming right now, where we are telling for the first time that, for example, biology of maximum lifespan and the average lifespan is different. So we're trying, we're starting decomposing aging in pieces, which could be modifiable very soon.
So thank you for explaining that. I wonder if you could help explain, for those that are listening, in terms of the approach that you guys are taking around this modeling and forecasting relative to, let's say, other researchers that are doing things in aging, but of course their approach and the models that they're using are very different as well. Whether we're talking about David Sinclair, Professor Nur Barzilai, or Eric Verdin, for instance, how would you characterize your approach relative to some of the others in terms of what they're doing around aging and longevity? You may also like our quarterly Ask Dr. Perkins event that brings some of the most notable experts and category-leading startups in their area of sustainability and human survival on Earth and in space. To register, visit askdrperkins.com/events.
You mentioned the great people with lots of experience, and also from my background, I mean, I should be mad to do what I'm doing alone. So we're actually working with great people from the aging research community. So obviously all our experiments are done by people who understand biology much better than we do. So I'd say there is a great upheaval in aging research these days. Aging research leaves laboratories and people start testing anti-aging drugs in humans. Jim Kirkland, Nir Barzila, Andrei Gutkov, lots of people you didn't mention. All of them are now going to humans with interventions that have been working for a long time in model animals. What we are doing may be somewhat different is that we are looking kind of going the other way around. We look at human data, we try to understand what happens with living humans, generate our hypotheses, and then ask our friends, great academics from the aging research community to help us test those hypotheses in animals. And if that works, we should be able to raise enough money to back check that in humans with, I hope, better probability to produce strong effects.
Now, one of the questions that I think I think your folks had provided to us is life extension only possible if we understand the mechanisms of aging?
I think, well, the question is yes, otherwise that would be a trial and error search, which is not totally unreasonable, but unreasonable. But nonetheless, I think since that would require human experimentation, which is not ethical even. It's not only not practical, but this is not also ethical. I believe that aging research community as the whole has generated lots of information. I think people understand what aging is and what's wrong with people before they get terribly sick. I mean, the whole amount of this information is now so large that people can generate great hypotheses for experimental testing. We are, I would say that we entered the era of clinical anti-aging medicine since a few years. So I think it's already possible since we understand enough of aging to actually try it in humans.
Now you mentioned, this notion of time periods, right? So a longitudinal study, and how small changes over time can be quite indicative of something that's happening. Can you talk about how fluctuations can be quite informative when it comes to, let's say, our ability for aging or understanding our health status, for instance?
Yeah, that's a great question because once again, since a few years, we have seen an explosion of different metrics, which are presumably measuring our biological age, essentially the progress of aging in our bodies. And we have lots of data to actually look at. Most importantly, we have longitudinal data, which means longitudinal means along the individual trajectory. We see what happens to those markers along life histories of real humans. And we start seeing funny effects. So, for example, we see that people who smoke and don't have diseases, their biological age older. I mean, this is not a surprise. That's what everyone knows. But the interesting thing is that if you don't have a chronic disease, if you stop smoking, that's what I think every young person knows, that if you stop smoking early enough, there is no persistent damage. I mean, that's a little bit politically incorrect to say, but if you have our level of accuracy biomarkers, you can actually see that by changing lifestyles, within a month, a healthy person can readjust to a new lifestyle. And if such a lifestyle is healthier, the life expectancy of such a person would also grow. So let's say for the youngest people or for still healthy people without chronic diseases, the most important question is not what is their level of biological aging, because that can be changed. The most interesting question is how quickly you readjust to the bad or for good interventions. So the problem which we have observed in large longitudinal data, and I think we have published a pioneering work on that, we observed that with age, people are actually losing their ability to come back to the norm after the stress. And this is actually what is killing you. It's not the problem if you are, sick or tired. A young person can, quickly recuperate, and that's what we know from our party experience. When you're 50, you don't party not because you don't like parties, but because you cannot survive them anymore. So what I believe actually happens now is that people not only access their level of aging, people also start to understand what actually makes them more vulnerable to diseases, and people are developing biomarkers of that vulnerability. And I believe that interventions which could make people more robust, more responding, quicker, relaxing to the better norm, those interventions will produce fold improvements in lifespan compared to incremental lifespan improvements, but most of the current approaches.
Now, can you talk a little bit about those interventions that you're referring to in terms of, again, depending on if you're in your 20s versus in your 50s are going to be very different, but identifying the right sets of interventions is important. But, what could those interventions look like? Is it a cocktail of different, approaches, therapies, drugs, and so forth? And then how do you know that those will actually make the difference in terms of improving or elongating one's lifespan? Don't forget to visit astroperkins.com to register for our next quarterly events. Past and current speakers include Julianne Hough, actress, dancer, and winner of Dancing with the Stars; Damian Vaughn, former NFL player; Neil Gregory, Chief Thought Leadership Officer at the IFC World Bank, and many more. To register, visit astroperkins.com and click on Events.
It's once again, it's a terrific question, because I think everyone kind of knows that if you eat less, you live longer. I think this is this doesn't require any proof anymore. The only problem that if you start doing this in a laboratory, for example, with a bunch of mice breeds, strains or flies, you would see that on average they would live longer, but there would be some strains, some types of flies or mice that would actually live shorter. The best body mass index for your lifespan is probably 24 on average. I mean, these are kind of research which is changing every year a little bit, but try to get the idea. The problem is that if you smoke, it should be higher, because apparently fat protects you from the effect of smoking. And if you don't smoke, it should be smaller than that, 20, maybe 2.5 or something like that for the optimal lifespan. So, which means that if I advise you to eat less, I cannot advise you without actually knowing what is your body mass index, and on top of that, without actually knowing if you smoke or not. Which means that there is a very great deal of personalization coming into this lifestyle optimization. Maybe if you are stressed, you have to be fatter. I don't know. This could be different if you are a boy or a girl. I don't know. With most of these interventions, we do not know. And the problem is that nobody is going to pay for clinical trials. Clinical trials are very expensive. We will get an actor or an actress which would write a book, how to lose a little bit of weight and live happier. You know, 1 million people would try that. Obviously, I don't know, for 30% of them that would not work. The problem is that without actually measuring the effects of those interventions, we will never optimize lifestyle for specific people. And that's where these measurements of aging, with biomarkers of aging from blood markers or maybe from physical activity, from wearable devices, they should get into the play to actually measure what actually works for you. And I believe that such a technology holds a great promise in actually ranking what works for you.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. So my last question for you is lessons learned in terms of any project failures that you can share in terms of insights that you can share with others.
I think that's there is this known situation that whenever you get into a new field, and every startup is an opportunity to get into a new field, I think there is always a dangerous period of time when you drastically overestimate your understanding and capability. And this is obviously the time range where most of the mistakes are made. So I think that in the retrospect, you should be doing what your parents and teachers have also always been telling you, is that talk to experts. Experts are not retarded people guarding against progress. Experts make more mistakes than you have ever tried to.
Perfect. Well, with that, I've been joined by Dr. Petr Fedichev, who is the CEO of Gero. Thanks for joining today.
Thank you very much.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.